going to go ahead
Very
and officially open the meeting at 7:07. And hopefully everybody can hear us. And welcome to the very first, but maybe not the last, of our online programs. And we'd like to have a response back from everybody that's watching this to see how they like that. And we're going to have a very interesting program this evening. And I'm just going to turn it over to Richard. Go ahead. It's all yours.
Okay, I'm going to share the screen. So everybody should be able to see this.
Looks good.
So does everybody see the?
I do.
Okay, well, I have a very big love story about the gemstone that we're going to talk about today. And it relates to a very interesting story, is that when I was a very young man and I was learning to cut stones, when I was 11 years old, my father, who was an insurance salesman, had a customer who was an aerospace engineer who was stationed over in Central Australia. And he came across 4 German prospectors who were out of money. So he loaned them about $3,000 in pancake mix and told them, I'll stake you for the next 6 months.
Hello.
So that's probably his internet connection. And
Oh,
yeah.
it wasn't me for once.
Richard, are you there? Awesome. Okay, so Richard is not there, apparently. We've lost connection with him. So this is like the excitement of live TV, right? I'm sure he'll be back in a hot sec.
He's muted. He's
Oh,
got
there we go.
his mic was muted.
Okay, give me a hot sec. There we go, Richard.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
We can,
Right now.
yeah. Thanks, sorry about that. I guess something was up with your internet connection. I just did want to remind everyone that as Richard goes through his presentation, he wanted you to know that if you had questions, like during, while he's, talking or during the slide, that in the bottom center of your screen is the little chat bubble, and you can just type a question in and he'll answer it. Okay, go ahead.
So anyway, I don't know when I dropped off, but anyway, I met this gentleman. He was an aerospace engineer. He helped fund 4 German prospectors that were in a little town called Andamooka, Australia. And they ate pancakes every day and mined. And 3 weeks later, they hit the largest seam of that year in Australia. It was $3 million worth of opal. It was a pure blue and green vein. He got 50% of the production, which he brought to Glendora. And I was a punk kid that knew how to cab pretty well. And so I got to basically cut his stash. And that's when I kind of fell in love with opals. And so I was able to see quite a bit of material from Australia. And I ended up cutting about 500 stones for a 4-year period. The biggest one was actually for the Prime Minister of Taiwan, and it was a 160 carat stone. So to me, it's having handled it from both a cutting perspective, being able to see some of the best quality stones that have come out of these mines. For me, it's really a true passion. And so what I wanted to do today is kind of give you a good general overview of opals. And I'll talk specifically about mines that I actually ended up going out and visiting in the mid-70s. So the key with opal is that opal is a member of the quartz family with one difference. And compositionally, it's silicon oxide with water. And so what makes this beautiful play of fire is the fact that it has microscopic pores that hold water. And you can have up to about 20% of a given stone could be around water. So the higher the water value, the more brittle the stone. So typically the best gemstone, the high grade, is things that are between 6 and 8% water. And if you were to go in and look at it at a microscope, it looks like little layers of ping pong balls. And so each of these ping pong balls, when they have a different size, reflect a different color. So what you're seeing is light going through the clear silica. It hits this layer of water and it plays back this fire. So it's a very unique stone in the fact that it has this water. When you take it out of the ground, it can actually evaporate and crack the stone. So they call that grazing. But generally, from a gemstone, what they're looking for is, a brilliant display of water, induced colors. And so what you see here in the specimen that I have, this is from Ethiopia. The other thing that you see is that because it's a member of the quartz family, it has a unique structure where it can have conchoidal fractures. And this is a result of how these bands of ping pongs kind of weave themselves through the stone. So the other thing that makes it very, very interesting is it's probably the trickiest stone to cut. Oftentimes when you're cutting it, you'll just nick an edge and a big flake will come off. The other stone that you may be familiar with is the volcanic form of quartz, which is obsidian. And that also has conchoidal fractures. That's what the Indians used to make arrowheads. So it's a relatively soft version of quartz. Typical quartz is in the 7 range, but when you add the water, the hardness actually gets reduced. So it's 5 to 6 on the Mohn scale. And then the other thing that's very interesting about it is that it can be a mixture of plays on how these ping pong molecular structures weave through the stone. So you can have common opal, which is more opaque, and then you can have these intense fires. And it's all based on this micro crystal formation. Does anybody have any questions? I'll continue on. So it's a very old stone in terms of gemstones, in terms of being recorded in history. It was talked about before Christ by the Greeks. And 69, Pliny the Elder, who was a Roman, basically accurately described it as being of a burning urn. So he loved the reds, and it was like holding for them a coal, a burning ember. And so it was very well recognized. What's interesting is that if you look at prehistoric deposits, it came from one location, which was Cervenka, Slovakia, and that provided the entire European continent. So the Greeks and the Romans traded from this location. It was used as gemstones. And so a very small amount of material came out. So when it was found and traded, it had a very, very high value. In the 1900s, it was discovered in Australia, massive deposits that were just outside Sydney and New South Wales. And that brought the product to the mainstream. And so up into the discovery of Ethiopia in the 1990s, literally 98% of the inventory that surrounded the world came from Australia. So if it wasn't for these vast deposits, it would be an ultra rare stone. But they were able to find 3 major mining districts in Australia, and it's really supplied the world. The other thing which is quite interesting is that the product is of volcanic origin. And so in the Pacific Rim, in particular Mexico, there's a lot of deposits in many different states in Mexico, and we're going to talk about their fire opal. But it was very interesting is that the Aztecs valued it. So there's many history, both oral and written, by the Aztecs mentioning the existence of fire opal. So again, a very old stone, but it wasn't until these deposits were discovered in Australia that it went into the mainstream. A couple other things that I want to talk to you about, which is quite interesting, is that it's had several myth cycles. So in the early days, it was extremely valued for its fire. In the 1800s, a woman wrote a disparaging critique of opal, saying that it was haunted and it was bad luck, and it was a way to kind of suppress the market. And that actually took on some, and it lasted for literally 70 years. Wasn't until Queen Victoria became enamored with the white opals that were still coming from Central Europe that it basically came back in vogue to wear them. So there was literally a 90-year, 70-year period where people thought that they were bad luck. The Greeks thought that it should only be worn during as a birthstone. So it has a very romantic side to it. It's been in the Europe, and it's been in now North America for a very long period of time. Any questions? I'll continue on. So right now, if you were to look at kind of where it's found, it's always
I have a
found.
question.
Yes, please, Elaine.
Yes. I was also told that the jewelers in England, you know, in order to kind of dissuade people from buying opals because they wanted people to buy their jewelry and their diamonds, they encouraged this idea that opals were bad luck unless they were your birthstone. And then there was also another story that was given about a woman who had an opal ring, and when she died, the opal went to dust. You know, I mean, it was, I forget the guy, the author who actually had that in a poem, in a story. But they encouraged people because they were kind of jealous of all this new hoo-ha that was happening in Australia with the opals. And Queen Victoria, like you said, she said, I don't give a darn. I'm giving them to my daughters and everybody anyway. That's all. Thank you.
So anyway, it's largely associated with volcanic geology. And what you usually see is that it's associated with basalt or rhyolite, where it's actually formed in pockets. So they think that the quartz was basically secreted into cavities. And then over time, the porosity of it allowed the water to basically come in. And then over time and under pressure, you were able to create these ping pong plates inside the stone. So when we look at the Mexican ones, you can see that they're right in volcanic. What was interesting is that volcanic rocks, like any other rock, will also erode. And so in the case of the Australian mines, they often find it associated with a decomposed volcanic rock called limonite. And the other gemstone that's formed in limonite is turquoise. So again, when they're mining in Australia, they'll go down different layers in these volcanic sediments, and they know that certain stones will basically be found in chert and limonite, all these volcanic layers that kind of got compressed under the earth. So I went to visit these mines in 1975, and it was quite interesting. You go down about 30 feet, and they were always telling me that the opal is found right underneath a layer that's literally like 3 feet of solid concrete. So they had to kind of go through this hardscape to get at this kind of volcanic layer where the opal, and they often thought that it kind of pulled up against the surface and then kind of formed over time. But right now it's widely distributed. It's found in Australia, in Queensland, New South Wales, and Central Australia. America has many known deposits, principally in Idaho and Nevada and California. We'll talk about those. It's found as far south as Guatemala and Mexico and Honduras along this Pacific Rim volcanic area. And then newer areas that have been coming out are beautiful black opals that are now coming out of Indonesia. Peru is producing some incredible blue opal. And then if you haven't seen it, probably the most significant deposit that rivals Australia is the new stones that are coming out of Ethiopia. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. In California, if you were to go out, and they didn't have a major military base there, but if you were to go out to Barstow, there's a significant mountain called Pilot Mountain, which is on the old Borax Mule Trail that led from Death Valley across the desert. There's a significant deposit of fire opal at a place called Pilot Mountain. I don't suggest that you go in there because I think it's probably a 30-year fine if you're caught mining in there, because it is an active military base. Just west of Barstow is an area called Opal Mountain, where you get beautiful cherry opal and honey opal. And then out in Death Valley, there's a place called Tacopa, and it's found directly in this basalt. And it has a beautiful blue cast and beautiful fire. So these are the significant deposits in California. If you go out to Nevada, there's a very known area called Virgin Valley. And what's quite interesting about the stones there is it's actually replacement of petrified wood. And we just hosted a photo on our website this week. And the opal is as beautiful as any that comes from Australia. There's also lesser fire opal that comes from Oregon and Spencer, Idaho. And then I think the most exciting thing that for opal lovers is that when we landed onto Mars and we took some of the samples of the rocks, NASA actually discovered opal on Mars. So if you guys are up for it and you guys can afford to get on the rocket, there's good rock hunting out there in outer space. Australia actually has led the way in creating the market for this. Production started in the 1870s. And so the vast majority of the material was sent in its day to Victoria, England. And Queen Victoria was a big champion of the stones. She wore pearls, opals, became a very fashionable item. By the time 1970s came, China became a major market. So I would say that about 70% of the production in Australia during that time was sent to China, where it was used for carvings and rings. And to this day now, if you go to Australia, almost every mining town has a Chinese business that's there to pay top dollar for the stone. So Asia by far, Japan, Taiwan, China is the major market for the stones today. So the first area that was developed is an area just outside of Sydney. It's called White Cliffs. It started in 1870, and beautiful white milky opal. And this became the standard for Victoria, England. So I actually own a stone. The mining area was depleted by 1955. I was on business in Melbourne, and I met a woman that had a store for 30 years, and she actually had a stone available to sell, but very striking, very like milky, creamy, and brilliant flash pattern in that. Just north of White Cliffs is Lightning Ridge. That became the most celebrated opal mining district in the world. It's the home of the really beautiful black opal, and I'm going to show you examples of it. It sets the world standard. for what opal can be. And Lightning Ridge is actually still producing. But the production is very, very light, and it's found very deep underground. And then in Central Australia, out in the outback in the 50s and 60s, Aboriginal people started finding opal out in the desert. And so there was 3 major mining districts that opened up. One was in Coober Pedy, one was in Andamooka, and one was in Mentatavi. And all of these are basically were the massive producers for opal in the 70s and 80s, but largely these mines now are depleted. Coober Pedy took so much material out of ground, the whole city went underground. So if you go out there, it's quite fascinating. People built all their homes underneath in the old mining shafts. So it's a complete city that literally exists underground. There's about 15,000 people there. And it's really fascinating to go and see that. And then in Queensland, they started finding what was called Boulder Opal. And this was formed in iron concretions. And I'll show you examples of these. But this became the standard for opal that's coming out of Australia now. So I would say that 90% of the material that you see coming out of Australia today is from Queensland, and it goes by the name Boulder Opal. And so we're going to be showing you some examples of that. Any questions? So this is what is called Lightning Ridge, and it's called a black opal. And so it has a very unique situation that the pattern is that the fire kind of emerges from a black background. And when you talk about opal, fire is important, but the way that you grade opal is actually by the color of the base. So when you look at this stone, you see that it's clear, that it has like a black background. This makes the fire really be brought to the forefront. This stone here goes for about $20,000 a carat, and that's about a 25 carat stone. So these stones are highly valued. The best production was actually before the 1970s. So a lot of these large stones often come from historic jewelry that's basically repurposed today and recut today. And so this is what's known as green flash. And then you can see just the intensity of the blue and the green that sits side by side. So this is the second most desirable color. I'll show you the other colors that typify Lightning Ridge. So Lightning Ridge has different types of fire. If you kind of look at the picture on the left, you'll see that there's this typical blue-green to blue. And so that's kind of considered the traditional color that's the most desired out of Lightning Ridge. You have these very unusual stones called Harlequins, where there's little cracks between the plates. And so it creates almost like a clown costume pattern, Harlequin. And that's the one that you see at 1 o'clock. We'll talk a little bit more about that. That is the most valued. And then you have this broad flash, which is kind of at 6 o'clock and in the center, where you have this dispersion of color. So Lightning Ridge is very well known for having this blue background or this black background, extremely valued. Some people like the broad flash, but it also comes in what's called pin flash, where it's little pinpoints of color. And they call this Starry Nights. And you can see that on your right. So you can see a nice dispersion of colors, but the overall base is black to purplish. So again, this is the most desired opal that you can find right now. And it goes anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 a carat. We'll talk more about that. The rarest of all of them is what are these are called Harlequins. If you look at the one on the left, this one is less desirable because what's happening is as the light gets dispersed on these individual planes, you get these little black spots. So key when you're looking at an opal is you want to rotate it in such a way is that it should have pure color all the way around. Where it has these black spots in it is less desirable. And the one on the right is probably the finest example that I've ever seen of a Harlequin, where you can see that there's this nice change of color between the individual plates. When I was in Australia, I met this woman that had the most successful opal store in Melbourne for 30 years. She's only encountered one of these in her entire career. And she had it in the vault and brought it out to me. These things go anywhere from 75,000 to 100,000 a carat. They're that rare. So this is what they call a Harlequin. This is what they call small pin with broad flash, so that you can see kind of in the center, you have these pinks and these blues, and then you have these big bursts of color. And this is another desirable trait that adds to the value of an opal. So where you can get this combination of small pin and broad flash, this is a very desirable one. Again, anytime you look at an opal, you want to just go around in a circle and make sure that there's consistent fire across the stone. That's the best way to buy it. And then the next is the actual color base, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Any questions?
Are there any questions in the chat section of your screen, Richard?
Let me see. Yeah, unfortunately, because I'm in preview mode in PowerPoint, it's not letting me go out and see that.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, gotcha. Okay. Thanks.
So this is typical when you look at an opal. There are certain colors that are unique to opal, but the ones that maintain the highest value is where you see these yellows and these oranges. So if you were to look at an opal and you hold all things equal, anything that has this orange and yellow is the most valued in the color range. And then the next is the blue and the green. And then there's oftentimes these violets and these pinks that are associated with it. Those are kind of nice accents, but they typically don't derive the final carat value associated with the stone. So if you're out looking and you find a nice one with this orange fire or yellow fire, that's probably the best thing for you to buy from an investment standpoint. So you look at the difference between this one, it's more blue with a little bit of yellow. And then you look at the intensity, see how much more vibrant it is. So what's nice about opal is that it takes on many different characteristics based on these color bases. So there's typically several ones that you can look for. There's people that like a bright orange base. This is very typical of Mexican opal. There's a gray base, which is coming out of Ethiopia now. And then you have the blues, and then you actually have some of the creams as well. So when you look at opals, separate from the fire, you want to look at the base color, and you can see that there's a rainbow that's associated with the stone. So it's really beautiful in its diversity.
Richard, Mr. Richard,
Yes.
Isn't red also considered a very valuable color?
Yes, and I'm going to show you the most valued in that is a
cool.
cherry color.
Thank you.
Yes, that's correct. So this is probably my favorite opal from Australia. It's a mining district that I actually went out, and this is called Andamooka Crystal. You can see that it has like a black background, but it's a very unique fire, and then it's these beautiful pinpoint colors that are emerging out of this. It almost looks like the Milky Way. And when you look at this stone, this is, you know, in somebody's finger, so you can see that it's so minute, and it doesn't matter how you turn it, it's like a galaxy of colors. And only Andamooka produced this. Again, the mining district is depleted in 1980, but this is probably the most beautiful opal that came out of Australia, and it's probably the rarest now.
Hey, Richard, if I could just jump in, since you're doing this and you can't read the chats, if anyone has a question, would it be okay with you if they unmuted themselves and asked the question at that time?
Yeah, that would be perfect.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. This is the new opal that's being found in Queensland. This is called Boulder or Seam Opal. It's very unusual how it's formed. It's found in sedimentary rocks with a lot of iron. So it's what they call concretions, where the opal has kind of found its way through the stone, and it kind of has followed cracks and seams. And you get these really beautiful color displays that are quite unique. It almost looks like the love child of agate and opal, because you get these beautiful seams and lines of color. And oftentimes they call this the butterfly. So when you cut the stone, you want to have kind of these bookends of color. So this is the current product that's coming out of Australia, and very, very valued. It's getting upwards to 22,000 a carat now out in the world market. And most of it is actually going, as I told you, is being sold in China and Japan. So that's the major market for this. And here's an example of a rough cut. So this person just basically cut this. So you can see the host rock, which is on the edges, which is kind of this iron sandstone. And you kind of see how the opal's kind of weaved itself into the fabric of the stone. It's found cavities, and it's just basically, you know, sat there for tens of millions of years forming. But it's really quite striking when you see it. And then here's a iron concretion stone. So you can see that it's banded, and it's kind of built its way much like a geode. So you can see in the center, some of the iron wasn't replaced. And then where there was weaknesses in the rock, the opals kind of come in and formed almost like a lava lamp. So you can kind of see that it has this really incredible breccia in it. So this is really valuable as well, these concretions.
Mr. Richard,
Yes.
is that a Yahweh nut, or would it be like a Yahweh nut opal?
Yeah, it's a Yahweh.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's what they are. And then you can see sometimes that it will just kind of find its way through in vein material and leave these dendritic feathers through it. So these are very, very valuable as well, if you can get, you know, these types of color ranges. I really love the stone on the right. If you look at the color in the bottom, it's equal to that Andamooka opal that I just showed you, which is this starry night. So you can see that there's a lot of broad flash in the top, but in the bottom you have this beautiful combination of pinpoint fire. So again, if you were to look at these two stones and you were out shopping, the one on the right you would give a higher value to than the one on the left, just on the pure nature of how the fire. What's very interesting in Australia is that because it's associated with sedimentary rocks, sometimes there's fossils that are in this original host material, and the opal will actually come in and replace it. So in the National Museum in Australia, they have a complete crab claw. They have a dinosaur lower jaw, and the teeth have all been replaced. I've seen clamshells. Numerous were produced out of Cupripede. They're still finding a lot of fossil replacements up in Lightning Ridge. So what you see here is actually petrified wood, where all the wood fiber has been replaced by opal. And this is from Australia. The one on the right is Lightning Ridge. The one on the left is Queensland. We have the same equivalent one in Nevada and Virgin Valley. And we just posted a picture 3 days ago. So this is very, very common, where it's taking over like a cast of a plant that was in these sedimentary rocks, and it literally replaces it. Here's an example of where it's gone in and replaced a marine invertebrate. So this is much like a fossil, and the opal found its way into the cavity and then became this. This is from the Cretaceous period. So this is a form of sea life that was out in the open ocean. So much like a plankton or a squid, and you can see that the opal has completely replaced the cavity. So it's a very unusual thing that you see about these opal deposits in Australia and Nevada, is these beautiful fossil specimens that are coming out of here. Probably the most exciting news in the world was the discovery of opals in Ethiopia. And it came at a time when the Australian production was waning. And so in 1994, they discovered a vast array of volcanic related stones. And you can see that it's formed directly in basalt. So the one that you see on the left, the opal basically was formed in this volcanic ash, and then the opal kind of found its way into cavities, and it basically formed these incredible array of colors. When you look at Ethiopia, it has two base colors. On the right, you can see, if you kind of squint your eyes and look, is that it's kind of a grayish blue. So that's one base color that you see a lot of that's coming out of Ethiopia. The other one is that they have a lot of creamy white. So it's opaque white with broad flash opal. And then they also have honey colored. It almost looks like a very vibrant liquid honey with fire in it. What's great about Ethiopia is that they've done a geological survey, and they believe that there's at least 200 to 400 years worth of deposits in country, and it will basically be the supply source, of my children and grandchildren. So this is a really exciting discovery. Just in production this year, it's producing about, they believe, 60% of the world demand now. So this is a very important finding. It's making Australia less important. So much is coming into the market. The prices are actually quite depressed on it. So it's a much cheaper version of opal, but it's one that, if you really look at some of the variations of it, it rivals the best that you'll see out of the traditional fields in Australia. This is Mexican fire opals. They come in two varieties. They come in what's called jellies or rainbows, and then it also comes in deep orange and deep red. Elaine, you asked, what is the valued ones? There is a cherry color, which I'm going to share with you, that is the most desired color out of Mexico. But what's typical of the Mexican is that these little opals are basically brecciated into little cavities in the volcanic rock. So you don't see pure stones. What you see is this combination of the volcanic basalt matrix or limonite matrix, and then pinpoints of this color coming through. It almost looks like a tortoise shell. It started in an area north of Mexico City, in It was started, the official mines were in 1870, but these stones were known by the Aztecs. And so they were part of pre-Columbian culture. They were actively described by the Aztecs and the Mixtecs. So they've gone out and they've been able to source many different locations now along the volcanic belt in Mexico. So the traditional mining area is not so important, but there's a lot of new mines that are coming out. And this is Elaine, this is the most desired color, which is this uber rare cherry or ruby color. And these stones can get upwards to $20,000 to $30,000 a carat, but they're not very common. I've only seen one in my time. But you can see that the colors are just very, very unique. And again, holding everything equal, anything that has orange is the most desired color that you want in the fire. What's interesting about Mexico is that you also have stones that, because it's in volcanic rock, you get these little rutile inclusions in the silica. And that's something that's very, very unique. So you can see all these little threads that are running from the base into the stone. These are very, very desirable as well. So these are called rutile inclusions. Very unique to the Mexican opal. This is the typical rainbow. So again, this is probably the size of your thumbnail. So you can see that it's almost a microscopic range of colors. But beautiful, beautiful diversity of colors, as you can see. These are sometimes called jellies as well. So when you're looking at Mexican opals, you can see on the right, they have these intense orange ones. And then you have these ruby ones that are ultra rare that come out of that spectrum. You don't see it in any of these. And then you have these common jellies. So the orange ones are typically the ones that, if you're looking at Mexican opal, are the ones that you should purchase. Probably the newest area is this beautiful crystal and black opal that's coming out of Indonesia. I just started seeing it in shows about 5 years ago. Again, it's associated with the volcanic mountainous areas of Indonesia, and it's just coming to market. But really nice display of colors, more blue and green and pink. I haven't really seen anything with the orange and the yellow, but it's a really beautiful stone. Because it's new and the market hasn't been developed for it, economically, it's one of the cheaper stones that you can buy. Here's an example of one that actually has the cherry color. And this is probably the best that I've seen brought to market. This was at Tucson this last year. So if you want to buy an opal, these are general price guides on how things are valued. If you look at a traditional milky white base, and if you look at a stone that's typically 3 to 5 carats, you're going to pay about $120 a carat for a milky white stone. I myself have cut many of the crystal and black opals, but the stuff that I actually make for my family and for personal jewelry is the white. It looks really good with off-colored gold. So if you do a rose gold or you use 18 karat gold, typically the white ones hold up much better against the really bright, luminous aspect of 18 karat gold. So it's a favorite of mine, and it's absolutely the cheapest. So I've bought White Cliff ones. I have Cooper Pedy ones in this milky color. I have a beautiful 3 carat that I just got from Ethiopia. So they're my personal favorites. If you look at the gray base of the Ethiopian, so this blue-gray, you can see that it makes a major jump to $400 a carat you'd want to pay. So a nice 3 to 5 carat stone, maybe $900 to $1,000 you want to pay. The Mexican fire opal, the orange, is about $200 a carat. And then if you get one of these rare, uber rare cherry ones, those are extremely expensive, just because they're so rare. The Andamooka Crystal Black, which I showed you, is about $1,200 a carat. Again, it's no longer being produced, so you would have to find somebody who has either an old stock or a historic ring where they can remove the stone and recut it for you. Queensland Boulder Opals went for about $2,250 a carat. So again, it's kind of replaced the traditional white and crystal opal that came from Cooper Pedy and Andamooka. And the best stuff is running at $22,000 a carat. So if you get this like pinpoint with the broad flash, you could pay up to $20,000 a carat. But typically the range for a good Boulder opal is about $2,000 a carat. And then the red orange, Lightning Ridge on a small stone is running at $4,000 a carat. By far, it's the world's standard for opal. So that would be a black base with the red orange fire. You can see it's worth double the green blue ones that I showed you. And those come at about $2,000 a carat. So what's nice about opal is that, there's good range in price. I would say that, if you look at, comparable stones, garnets that we've talked about that are coming out of Africa now, they're in the lower price range. And again, what's great about opal is that it's really your personal like, whether you like the broad flash or the pinpoint, or if you like a particular base. So that's the presentation. I'd like to open it up to anybody who has particular questions.
Mr. Richard?
Yes.
Yeah, the Boulder Opal that you talked about, that's with the ironstone.
The closer you realize it's really
What's that?
Excuse me.
Pontiac Fiero mimicking.
Excuse me, Sandra.
I asked for hot sauce and I asked for onions and butter. So
And
just make sure, yeah, but make sure they're that they gave them to you.
Excuse me.
Unmute yourselves as you talk. Go ahead, Richard.
Anyway, hello. Just wanted to, the Boulder Opal that you talked about in ironstone.
Yes.
Okay. And you said that can be up to $2,200 a carat. Depends on the, the pattern, the fire, the color, and everything like that. It definitely is, well, I would say it could be more durable because it's an ironstone, maybe?
Yes, that's absolutely the case. Generally, what I recommend about opals, having cut them, is that if you're wearing them as a ring, that's a very risky proposition because the nature of the stone has this conchoidal fracture. That's part of it. Typically, when I make jewelry with it, I make earrings and pendants because they're a lesser impact. And then the other thing that you need to remember is because the stone is so porous, you don't want to use it as part of your household endeavors like doing dishes.
Oh, God.
So make sure that if you have an opal, do not get it near any soaps, dish detergents, and the like, because you can ruin the fire. The Ethiopian ones have very high water content. And if you actually put them in water, sometimes it can kill the fire.
I've also heard about the ones called hydropane.
Yeah, that's what they are.
Ethiopian stones that are really susceptible to water because it can bring out the fire and then it dries up and it goes away. But the Ethiopian, the willow ones, have recently been proven to be a little more durable than the old ones used to be. The old ones were more susceptible to crazing and cracking, but the newer finds seem to be pretty stable from what I've heard.
Yeah, it's very interesting is that the Australian miners used to put the opals in glycerin, and
Right.
they would put it in jars, and then they would ship it here, and you would see a really beautiful stone. And I bought a 20-carat stone, took it home, and it completely grazed, is what they call it. It got so many cracks because as it was drying out, it put pressure on these ping pong like plates, and literally it turned to dust, like you said, literally just cracked through.
Bummer.
So you have to be very careful that you get a high quality stone from a reputable dealer. You want to get something that has a low water content. Good numbers are 6 to 8%. All the stones I've ever had that are 12 to 14% grazed. And
As the and the opal in basalt, the stuff from Honduras, you don't see much fire, but that certainly is more durable than the rest of them, I would imagine.
yeah, if you've seen the Honduran
I have it.
opal, the equivalent that we have in American, you guys can go out and mine it today, is in Tecopa by Death Valley.
California.
There's these huge ridges out there of basalt, and it's like volcanic glass that's impregnated in it, and beautiful colors, but they're small stones like the Mexican and the Honduran. But the Tecopa opal is really beautiful. I used to go out there when I was a kid, rock counting. It's really beautiful things, just right on the outskirts of the park.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Do you cut Boulder Opal any differently than the other opal?
Yes, because of these conchoidal rings, you have to be very careful when you cut it because the hardness on the surface is different. So you can have pitting that can take place because the iron is harder and the opal is softer. So sometimes it will throw pits in your stone as you cut it. And then you also have to be very careful when you're polishing it that you have to use diamond versus oxide polishes because they'll heat up and the water in the opal makes them extremely unstable. So the Boulder opals are much trickier. I myself don't like cutting them because for those reasons. I'm more like a pure.
And they're very messy.
Yeah. But, they're by far, 90% of the opal that's coming out of Australia is coming from Queensland now.
Thank you.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah,
Good to see you,
I
Colin.
don't know if everybody can see this. Catherine and I are in Pensacola, Florida right now, and there's a gentleman, we're members of the Gem and Mineral Society here also. A gentleman who spent some time in Australia got a load of, I think he said a full container full of 50-gallon cans of Boulder Opal he brought back. And so this was one of the pieces that I got from him. It has a nice pattern in the, a circular pattern in the middle. It has some nice small pieces of fire. But the most interesting thing is a big chunk right here on top. And it has, I can see through the outside, it has color in it. So I've always been excited about that. And Catherine got one piece also that has a little bit of the color in it.
Yeah, you can see the classic blue flash right there.
Yeah.
The camera, it's very unique to that opal.
Yeah, he has a piece that I saw was the ones I've already seen have just been very thin layers of the Boulder Opal, but this one, I think it probably had about a 2-inch thick seam, and it was about maybe 3 or 4 inches long. I told him I didn't know how in the world that thing would be worth, but had to be worth a lot of money if he cut it.
What's quite interesting, Collie, about the mining zone is it actually goes for tens to hundreds of miles. So Lightning Ridge is a collection of like 3 towns that are adjacent to each other. Coober Pedy is just one little town. Andamooka was a little town. This whole Boulder area, it's a substantial geological area that it's found over wide distances. So it goes by different names, but the reality is that they find it over tens to hundreds of miles in this zone. So it kind of follows this ironstone.
I put a little message in the chat. There's a show on the Discovery Channel called Outback Opal Hunters, and they have opals. They have hunters in each area of the opal. They have one in Queensland, Boulder Opal. They have the Lightning Ridge mining, and then some around Coober Pedy. And it also showed a little bit of some of the opals from Mentawai, and but it's closed down now, so no more opal there.
Thank you for sharing that, Collie. I posted a link to the Discovery Channel website where the Outback Opal Hunters is located. We really appreciate that. Thank you.
So Marjorie, I was able to open up chat now.
Right on.
I'm out of PowerPoint, so I wanted to go through each of the questions. So the first question is, did they cut them in 8069? How did they use them? Actually, what's quite interesting is that they valued them in the raw state and in the cut state. And so they found examples of both. So where it's the raw stone with a lot of fire play, and then there were stones that were cut in Roman times. The Martian Opal sadly does not have a lot of fire, but it is quartz that contains water. So we've often talked about, the Martian planet being a wet planet. So what was found was actually a creamy white opal, not a fire opal. And then the next question, the pin flash and the broad flash and the Harlequins are amazing. Quite interesting is that this is a good time if you want to buy an opal, because with the country being in a recession or depression, a lot of old stones are being surfaced now to be brought out to market. I thought it was really interesting is that Bill Larson of Paula International actually posted a Harlequin on his site 3 days ago. So you don't see them very often, but when you can find a Harlequin, they're absolutely stunning when you see them in person. Melinda asked, I keep hearing ironstone. I have an opal rock and it's very heavy. Is that because of the ironstone? Absolutely. Typically when you hold a Ethiopian opal, they're quite light. When you hold a ironstone Queensland opal, they're extremely heavy. So if you were going to assault somebody, you want to do it with an ironstone opal. That definitely will get your point across better than an Ethiopian opal.
Hey, Mel, can you say something while you hold that up so you come onto my speaker viewing and it's really big?
Okay.
Oh, there we go. And then just maybe hold it still.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Where'd you get that thing?
Quite honestly, I don't know. It's a decent size rock. It's very heavy for its size. It's got a lot of color in this piece here. Of nice fire. It's got several like veins, I guess you would call them, that I see this way, a few veins. So I don't know how big and thick those things are, but it's got some nice color. And I don't have any idea how you would go about cutting this. I have no clue.
Yeah, unfortunately, you kind of have to follow the fire, but if it's kind of dispersed out, sometimes you just have to take a guess. The other thing that you want to do is look to see that there's conchoidal fractures that you kind of follow away from that, to, like you would cut a obsidian. Doug Gilbert, our man in Iowa, said, how do we store opals? We have Mexican fire opals that we bought in the 1960s that are sitting in boxes in a basement. The answer is you should just send them to me, Doug, and I'll take good care of them.
Yes.
Now, opals are probably the most fragile stones that you can have in your collection. So typically what I do is I keep them stored in plastic, sealed. I usually keep them in a dark, cool place. If they're going to graze, it's going to be due to heat and expansion and contraction of the stone. So I've cut stones and then come back in 6 months and had them completely cracked through. So it's just the water content that's in the stone. Mexican opals typically are harder. Elaine kind of mentioned that, is that they tend to be tougher because they're right in the basalt. And the fact that you've had them, Doug, since 1960, I don't think that if they're not showing any cracks, then they're good to be put into jewelry and worn. Again, I don't recommend you use them from a ring perspective. I would make jewelry, bracelets, things that aren't going to hit edges. So I would do more pendants, earrings, things like that.
Cool. Yeah, my grandparents bought opals and Apache tears when they'd go over the border from their place in Donna, Texas.
Well, that's nice, Doug. So anyway, Doug, I won't say anything about the Green Bay refrigerator, but I love it. Anyway, thank you for joining, by the way. It's really nice to see that you were able to come in virtually. But we have a great group here, and once a month we try to get together and talk through these things. So welcome.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Different side of me too, you know, keep expanding your mind. Doug is a good business client of mine. We work in industry together. But yeah, I think that if you've had them since the 1960s, if they're not showing any grazing or cracks, they're good for jewelry. Anybody else have any chat, or anybody want to chime in? Feel free.
Just wanted to say thank you, Richard and Marjorie, for putting this together. It's really gone very well. And I'm pleased at the audience that we have, and maybe as we continue to do these, we'll have more people join in. It was very good, very coherent, and well run and put together, Richard. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I have a question. I have a tiny little opal, little fire opal. And is there any way to cut it out and do something with something this size?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. I'm afraid to touch it. I'm not quite sure. So you said follow the fire. I mean, can you just cut the back off of it, or not quite sure what you mean follow the fire?
So typically, if you look at the stone, you can see the layers of the ping pongs.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of get a sense of what the play of color is. Again, as you cut it in a cabochon, you're rounding the surfaces. So what you're trying to do is get these plates of these like ping pong structures to basically kind of adhere to the pattern that you have. But typically, I would suggest a couple things. Always use a diamond wheel, and always put a lot of water on the stone. What you don't want it to do is develop any heat through friction, because it will shatter or you'll get these conchoidal cracks. So it's a very delicate stone. When you're cutting, don't spend more than 2 seconds on the grinding wheel. You know, do short bursts and kind of start working the color out. And then sometimes you'll see what's called potch, which is sandy, kind of opaque areas. And sometimes you'll have to cut through those to get to the clear opal. So a lot of times this crystal opal isn't consistent. There's this opaque material that runs through it. But typically what you want to do is go towards the orange and the yellow. So wherever you see those colors, play for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Richard?
Yes, Melinda.
Wasn't me.
Oh, it was me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Elaine.
Yep. Yeah. I got some Indonesian opal over a year ago, and one came in a ring and some kind of strange metal. It was black, and it had the black actually looked more like a black Boulder opal almost. And then he sent me 2 pieces that were, they had a lot of opalized wood, I guess, over there, that were packed in an oil in 2 sealed envelopes. So that kind of makes me wonder about, what you said about keeping it in glycerin. Maybe it was glycerin. I don't know. I didn't test it to see, but it did have fire in it. And I've continued to see things that are in Indonesia that are coming out of there that are like chalcedonies and chrysoprase that are in petrified wood that are kind of insane and kind of different. It's almost like a new frontier.
Yeah, they have some beautiful plume agate coming out of there right now, moss agates or otherworldly.
Unusual stuff. And the opals also that are coming out of Peru, the more common opals, the blue opals that the blue opal beads look like some high grade turquoise, almost. But they have beautiful blue colored opals that are like a common opal, and pinks. And the other ones are kind of nondescript, but the blue opals are really fine beads, really nice beads. Anyway, for those beaters.
And if you guys have a chance, and I say this to you, some of the most beautiful opal I ever saw it was clear and looked like cherry juice. That's the only way to describe it. And that's out in Hinckley, which is the town next to Barstow to the west. And you can look on the map, there's a place called Opal Mountain. And it's about a 12-mile drive off the main road out to the collecting site. But I have actually seen the most beautiful, almost like cherry juice, clear opal come out of that location. You have to dig in the rock. It's compressed volcanic rock, and it's not a fun day at the mine, as they say. But some of the stone so one of my prize stones is I have a clear honey opal there. And it literally looks like honey right out of a honey bear.
Is it an open mine, Richard?
Yes, it's open mine. Very well-known location in the 50s and 60s. And I've actually, I had friends that actually through Inyokern actually went out to Pilot Mountain and mined out there. It's the same type of really beautiful opal that you're seeing out of Nevada. And unfortunately, that's in the middle of the Naval Weapons Air Station.
Oh, no.
So if you guys want to dodge Sidewinder missiles on your pursuit for fire opal, go ahead and do it.
Is that the same Pilot Mountain that the turquoise comes from?
Yeah, there's some turquoise out there, and then there's some very famous plume agate that's found out there at Windgate Pass. So if you want to draw the boundaries of good military bases, make sure that you always include at least 4 or 5 classic rock county sites to restrict the public from. There's beautiful stuff out on that base, world class.
Do we know anybody stationed out there?
I know. That's the end, though. By the way, I love your spider.
Thank you. I'm wearing it.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions, people?
Good job.
That was so great. Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed this, by the way. I think this is a really nice format.
It is nice.
Thank you so much.
Makes it easy.
Okay,
Thank you,
Marjorie.
Richard.
Marjorie, can you unmute everyone so we can give Richard a round of applause?
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it.
Here, we can do the wave.
Yay!
Oh, that's I am not worthy. That's not a wave.
Thank
Great
you,
job.
everybody,
Great
for
job, Richard.
tuning in.
Thank you.
That was
And it's nice
awesome.
somebody from that wouldn't generally come to the meeting was able to participate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right on Doug. Doug was one, right? And Collie, are you in, did you
Florida.
say you're in Florida?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So
I didn't
great.
realize.
Yeah, we're in Pensacola.
Uh-huh.
Oh, wow. So it's late for you.
Yeah, it's past my bedtime.
Thank you for sharing the specimen, Collie. That was really special.
That's
Well,
beautiful.
I probably couldn't show it properly, but sometime that one, I like the thrill of maybe there being something in there.
Yeah.
So, but sometime I'll have to have somebody try to see if it actually is a nice chunk of Boulder Opal.
So just as an aside, everybody, when I was 11 years old and this guy, Jack, got this massive deposit of Andamooka, he used to charge me a whopping $2 a stone. So it was never by carat weight. It was like, hey, I've got to make this piece of jewelry, go cut this stone. So I actually cut 169 carat Andamooka of that black crystal with a pinfire.
Wow.
For the wife of the Prime Minister of Taiwan. And singularly, and I say this to you, I must have been like 12 or 13 when I cut it. And so I was like super nervous the whole time. I cut this giant stone and then I presented it to him, and then he made it into a very elaborate piece of jewelry and it was sent to Taipei. But I often say that probably in my life, that's the most beautiful thing that I've ever held in my hand for a gemstone. And I was so stupid not to take a picture of it. So, and again, it was a private transaction, so I'm sure that it's not out in public, but it was singularly the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen or touched from a gemstone. And I got $2 to cut it. So it was pretty awesome.
Wow.
Great story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, anyway,
Good night, everybody.
enjoy your evening. Thank you for letting me be the first dummy.
Good night.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
Richard.
Rock on.
Oh,
Night.
how do we log out?
Good night, everybody. Hit leave.
Click the leave at the bottom.
Leave.
Hey,
Oh,
Mark,
there
read
it
it
is.
for everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.
I hope they recorded it.
Is anybody still there?
It was recorded. Marjorie's recording it.
Are you gonna?
Thanks, Liz.
Hey, are you gonna put it on the Facebook page?
Yes, eventually it'll go on. Probably our Facebook page.
Or maybe YouTube.
Or YouTube?
Or YouTube.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
probably
right. We have the YouTubes.
goes on
Yeah, which
YouTube.
we need to get some content on.
Yeah, that's right. We have the YouTubes. I think that's what it was going to go on.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So,
Great.
yeah, Marjorie's recording them all.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
Thank you all.
Good night. Good to see you guys.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Gary, you liked it? Yeah?
Yeah, I did. I think it
It's
worked
nice,
pretty
huh?
good. Yeah.
Worked pretty good. Yeah. Someone from Florida. And then where was Richard's friend from?
What is it, like Idaho or no?
Which, Ethiopia?
No, his friend. that came
Oh,
in.
his friend? I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Defo.
Anyway, yeah, so this got recorded, and I'll go ahead and figure out how to get it over to our channel, and then we'll just maybe, I don't know. I liked that so many people from different places. There was a total, I think, of 29 of us, 29 or 30. It'll show. In the record, but that came, and so like they came, and then when we have it up, even more people will see it. So hopefully that'll let them know just how rad our club is.
And we're still trying,
Yeah.
we're out there doing our thing, so that's what counts.
Yeah.